The Ascendant Plane, explained for those who work 40 to 80-hour work weeks. Did I get your attention? Good! Hello, fellas. My name is Nothing Important here, and today is part 2 of the Destiny Cosmology video series. The goal of this series is to completely break the barrier between newcomer and veteran and their understanding of the Destiny lore, because a lot of people don't have 94 minutes to just throw away willy-nilly. Because of the time constraints people have, they don't have the opportunity because they simply lack the time to learn the storytelling of Destiny and how it works. Therefore, I hope you learn something or you remember something from what I give you in this video. And while we're at it, if you enjoy content such as this, please leave a like, share, and subscription, and especially share it around to your friends, because stuff like this really helps me and motivates me to make more content. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Goodbye! Next, what is the Ascendant Plane? The easy answer is this. The Ascendant Plane is the most iconic part of Destiny's cosmology people in and outside of the franchise know it for. The Ascendant Plane itself is home to the Hive and the Taken, and some Dread. The Ascendant Plane is a place that a lot of people know, which is ruled by the gods, which is the Worm gods and the other Hive gods. There are under a count of 10 Hive gods at this time who rule the entire plane. The Hive themselves as a race is very political. Their politics mostly devolve into combat, so translating a lot of the combat that the Hive do, it's very apparent that a lot of their morals, ethics, and traditions are all very political based. Hive politics, unlike normal politics in real life, is quite simple. They do things by strength in combat, and the strongest Hive gods, or the Worm gods and the other Hive gods, are all the strongest and they do their own thing. They don't encroach on each other. In fact, they train each other and they teach the other how to get around certain ways they were defeated before. For reference, look at the various behaviors of the Hive gods in the Books of Sorrow, a set of books which have dated back to 2015 and the release of the Taken King era. It is also worth noting that the Hive view love and hate as one and the same. So Xivu Arath, being the goddess of war, in another perspective would be the goddess of love. Oryx, the navigator, would be the innovator or the expander. Savathun, as the one who's the smartest of the three in terms of pure intelligence, trying to develop the technique and skills of the wizards and other Hive, are trying to make the Hive stronger fundamentally. Each of the Hive have their own responsibility in what they contribute to the greater collective of the Hive. It's all very interesting stuff in their dynamics, but to boil it down to something simple, it's this. The Hive gods are not acting in opposition to each other, even if they have differing beliefs. Above all else, the Hive gods value each other above, well, everything else. No matter how much the Hive gods stray from each other or have quarrels and rivalries, they value each other over everything else in all of creation. The last note I would like to make regarding the Hive is this heavily translates into their violent behaviors. To the rest of the universe, the Hive are defying the social contract in every conceivable and non-conceivable way imaginable. To the Hive, it's completely different. The Hive, compared to every other race in Destiny, is the most passionate about their beliefs. While we see very horrible things happening, to the Hive, what they see is they share their idea of strength with their rivals. They're looking for competitors. They want to challenge themselves against something and find a new rival. They wish to make themselves stronger and they wish to be eternally forever growing, and they don't want to stop at all. They want to be relentless. The dreams of many a man are to live a life of family, unity, peace, serenity, success, glory, and responsibility. To live out the dream we set for ourselves to obtain all those things, that is the biggest hit of dopamine a man or woman could ever receive in their lives. That hit of dopamine you would get from obtaining those things is the same hit of dopamine that the Hive get from conquering the entire universe, being the strongest, defeating their rivals, and having nothing left to challenge them. What I just described to you in the ways that many a man dream are what many a Hive dream to do to the universe and all within it. To put it simply, if you don't fear the Vex, then the ones you should fear would be the Hive, because the Hive will never stop until they get what they want, which is the death of everything. If you were to ask me the hard question, which is, how would you describe the Ascendant Plane in the most complex and elaborate manner? Here's what I would give to you. The Ascendant Plane is everything the physical universe is not. Within our space, the physical universe, we recognize things such as space, time, dimensionality, shape, math, the laws of matter, and other such laws that govern reality. Those things are completely absent from the Ascendant Plane. What about what's inside the plane, however? Good question. While there's a lot to be discussed on the topic of the plane, here's the overall list. You have the ley lines, the sea of screams. You have the throne worlds, which the throne worlds themselves are an interesting conversation to have. There's a beyond infinite amount of Ascendant Hive. The Hive themselves, once they gain enough tribute, they give enough of it to their gods, and they keep enough for themselves. Eventually, they earn the right to traverse the Ascendant Plane as a being who's ascendant within it. They gain a throne world. They gain something that's finally their own. When you go up the list of ascendant beings, it's unclear if there's ascendant ogres, ascendant knights, ascendant acolytes, ascendant thrall, ascendant wizards. We're not sure on the specifics. What we do know is if you're ascendant, you're likely an acolyte, or you're a knight, or you're a wizard, or you're an ogre. Shriekers themselves are odd enemies. Gameplay-wise, they're coded as weapons, but lore-wise, they're vessels to their gods. They act as a second pair of eyes. The only way I could see a Shrieker having a throne world was if the Hive god they came from made a throne world for them, then tossed them in it, so that the throne world acted as an extension of the god's throne world. We haven't seen behavior like that in the lore, and more likely than not, it is a wasted effort on all fronts. If it was something worth considering, the Hive would have done it by now. But instead, we mostly see Shriekers being posted as sentry turrets and to act as a second or third or 1000th set of eyes. Shriekers are interesting enemies, but they're the most dubious of likely every enemy type in the game, if we're being honest. Moving up the chain is the courts. Every single Hive god has a court of their own. Crota, for example, was on the court of Oryx. Now he's left and made his own bloodline, and he has his own throne world. Crota would still be considered a part of Oryx's court because he's the Prince of Hive, However, Crota is one of the strongest members of the courts. The daughters would be relative to Crota, but individually they would be below him, plus physically they're not quite as on par with Crota. Crota is not the smartest tool in the shed. He's like his father, but he's weaker and far less competent on the mental front. While Crota is not by any means autistic, he's not bright either. He just goes head first into stuff and is very bloodthirsty. The daughters, on the other hand, are more cold and calculated. They do a bunch of other stuff to make up for the fact that physically they don't hit worth jack. The daughters know this. This is why they created True Deaths. And Throne Worlds being thrown in with the whole concept of True Death, and you can see why the daughters slightly impressed Oryx with their ingenuity, innovation, and overall cunning. To say nothing else about the other courts of the gods would be criminal. Savathun's Hive focus on refining the spellcraft of the witches, and overall Hive faction in general, although nowadays they more favor the light stuff rather than the stuff of darkness, because they use Mbaru rather than the traditional sword logic of other Hive factions. Xivu-Arath's Hive thrive on war. Without Oryx around to keep Xivu-Arath and her Hive in check, Xivu-Arath's Hive are a little better than just rabid dogs who want nothing more than to destroy everything in front of them. There is a method to their madness, and they're certainly not lacking. Xivu-Arath has been warring, and they've acted as a general for well over billions of years at this point. However, that being said, Xivu-Arath is fairly straightforward with her faction of Hive compared to the rest. Eris Morn, now that she's in the discussion as a Hive god with a throne world, her court is different. Her throne is called the High Heresy. The High Heresy acts in opposition against her fellow, in quotations, Hive. The Last City and the Guardians are the ones that roam her court. Humanity and the physical universe are her court. Her ambitions and what she strives to combat are her targets. Her court lives and thrives under the concept of warring against her enemies. Eris Morn embodies the concept of vengeance itself, and it shows. Of all the Hive gods, Eris Morn is the most defensive of the Hive gods. There is no Hive god that can launch an invasion against her without her becoming a one-shot difference above them and completely cleaving them from this world. The only way to draw Eris Morn would be through a cold, calculated war. In an individual fight against Eris Morn, little hope of victory would be sought. Instead, all you can do is hopefully avoid her. When you look at the Hive, we're aware of 4 different courts. We don't know if the Worm Gods have a court. It may be entirely possible that the Worm Gods are the strongest of all Hive, and the Ascendant Plane, or at least the Hive Gods within it, are their court. We're not too sure about the Worm Gods yet. They're kind of in the same position as the Ahamkara and the Nine, where we know enough about them, but not a whole lot in comparison to everyone else. What I will say about the Ascendant Plane, however, is, along with what I just told you, I want you to keep something else in mind. You don't have to be that strong, and you can make the Ascendant Plane stronger. One of Oryx's daughters manifested 11 axioms, or 11 ideas, to describe the full scope of the plane, and then every throne world after that adopted a similar version of the 11 axioms or 11 ideas concept that Daughter of Oryx created. So single-handedly, the Daughters of Oryx, along with their intelligence, innovation, and very creative cruelty, expanded the scope of the plane, even though they are nowhere near the witness in fighting ability. This is the nature of the Ascendant Plane, to be something that isn't stable, that isn't fixed, something that is driven by will, consciousness, power, mental ability, competence, every other stat imaginable that you can examine, and not necessarily the physical sense. That is what drives the structure of the plane. Let's conclude the Hive since I was talking for a while. The Hive live in the Ascendant Plane. The ley line is the general pathway into the plane. The Sea of Screams is the base level of the plane. A throne world belongs to an ascendant being. A throne world has 11 ideas or 11 concepts, whatever you think of those are, inside said throne world. There is a beyond infinite amount of these Ascendant Hive, and the throne worlds stack on top of each other, higher and higher, as more influential and more powerful as you get. Eventually, you arrive at the courts. The courts themselves being a very broad tier, because that consists of the politicking of 4 different Hive gods, and the courts of the Hive execute the will of the Hive god in question. With 4 different courts all competing with each other, it is a very broad tier to discuss. The courts themselves I could make a 20 to even 50-minute video about alone. And then you have the Hive gods. There are 9 of them at present. The 5 worm gods, the 4 Hive gods. The placement of the worm gods in particular is not completely clear, but we do have the placement of the Hive gods in particular. I'm going to leave that part in. We have the placement of the Hive gods in particular, with Oryx at the top. The only competition with Oryx is who amongst the worm gods can compete with Oryx and why. And that, dear viewer, would be my answer to what is the Ascendant Plane in the most elaborate, complex way imaginable.